Yeah.
Okay. The Subcommittee on Space will now come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Budget for Fiscal Year 2019. I would like to now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The passage of the 2017 NASA Transition Authorization Act last year was clear evidence of the committee's bipartisan support of NASA. The FY19 budget request reflects the administration's adherence to the continuity of purpose described in the Authorization Act. This committee's commitment to NASA's long-term goals are codified in law and the hearing record we've established over the years. Mars has been and will remain the first interplanetary destination for humanity. And along the way, NASA has been encouraged to carry out any mission necessary, including cislunar activities, to advance future interplanetary exploration. There are many benefits to this strategy. The moon offers a proving ground closer to home for advancing the technologies necessary for deep space exploration. The opportunities for commercial and international participation could greatly enhance a lunar mission. And the more frequent operational cadence will better prepare astronauts, mission crews, and commercial partners for future missions. We were very encouraged to see the President sign the Space Policy Directive 1 last year and the new exploration campaign at NASA in the budget proposal. But the details are still forthcoming, and as a friendly reminder, the exploration roadmap called for in the 2017 Authorization Act was due back to this committee on December the 1st. I hope the administration will see fit to send this important report soon so that the committee has the best information to work with. The President's budget proposal also includes some ideas about the future of the International Space Station. Currently, the ISS will operate until at least 2024, and the budget proposes to end direct government funding in 2025. The idea is that the commercial sector will step in to operate the ISS with NASA as the customer, as a customer, I should say. The ISS managed and operated out of the Johnson Space Center. It is a unique test bed for deep space exploration and serves as a significant services customer to our developing NASA commercial partners. I remain open to new ideas relative to future operations, but obviously we need a detailed and realistic sustainable plan for any ISS transition in the future. We will need buy-in from the industry and the workforce well in advance of simply turning off the lights at the ISS and walking away. Now I know that isn't what is on the table, but NASA will need to do a better job articulating this plan as we move forward. As another friendly reminder, the ISS transition plan called for the 2017 Authorization Act was also due back to this committee on December the 1st. Turning to NASA's science portfolio, this budget request continues to restore balance and support critical work across the entire science directorate. The budget supports a robust science program. This includes a range of small, medium, and large missions, such as the TESS exoplanet mission next month, the Mars InSight lander in May, the Parker Solar Probe over the summer, and the James Webb Space Telescope in 2019, as well as the flagship Europa Clipper and Mars 2020 rover missions. All exciting stuff. NASA has many exciting projects and missions across the agency. It is amazing to see the progress that's been accomplished over just the last year. Very soon, SLS, Orion, Dragon 2, and Starliner vehicles will take their very first flights. NASA will begin construction of the Deep Space Gateway, the first permanent human outpost beyond low Earth orbit. And with continued bipartisan congressional support, NASA will continue to make great strides in deep space exploration. I want to thank Administrator Lightfoot for his testimony and I look forward to this very important discussion. I would like to now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning and welcome to Acting Administrator Lightfoot. And thank you for your strong leadership. You know, as we look at the budget, you know, we're somewhat happy with the top line numbers. It does suggest the administration and the importance of space exploration and funding NASA. But in the 2017 NASA Transition Authorization Act, we talked about NASA being a multi-mission agency and organization. And you know, as we dive into the budget, there are some areas of concern of the overweight focus just on exploration. None of us is going to argue that exploration is not important, but we also want to make sure we don't lose sight of the space science side, the space technology, the aeronautics and education. You know, one area of concern is on the space science side is the moving away from the focus on W first. You know, if we think about the objective decadal process, W first was a priority project there, and the decadal surveys served us well. And again, not looking at this scientific-based prioritization and moving away from that certainly can set a dangerous precedent. We don't want to get into a situation where every 4 years priorities are changing. That makes it very difficult for the NASA Administrator and NASA to focus on some of these longer-term projects. On aeronautics, cutting back on the X-plane demonstration, aeronautics and aviation is an area where America is a world leader. And if we don't continue to maintain that focus and that lead, well, that doesn't just have repercussions on our ability to be the world leader there because others will step into that place, but it does have repercussions on an important segment of our economy. And again, aviation is a 90 billion positive trade balance for the United States. In the area of education, you know, the chairman and I were noticing the number of young people that are out there in the audience, and I think it's great that you know, the students and the young people that are out there have such an interest in space and science and in exploration, and the diversity that you see across this audience. And I'm not, as a father of a daughter, it is great to see the number of young women in this room as well, thinking about science and thinking about the future. So thank you for being here. But let's not cut the education budget as well, because education is incredibly important, particularly programs like the MUREP program, the Minority University Research and Education Program, because the diversity we see in this room, we want to make sure that next generation also reflects the diversity of the United States. So funding programs like that are incredibly important. And let's touch on exploration. I mean, exploration is incredibly important, but as we start to think about, you know, we saw the Space Council wanting to focus on a return to the moon and the lunar mission. We also think about, you know, we've talked about that return to the moon as well. But in truth, a lot of us talk about the desire to go to Mars, and I think my colleague from Colorado certainly will emphasize that. And the danger, if we think about our own history and think about, you know, when President Kennedy challenged us to put a person on the moon, we set a focus, and we didn't change every 4 years. We had some longevity. We understood what that mission and focus was. And you know, if our desire is to go to Mars and go deeper into space, we have to, you know, maintain a focus on, you know, how we get there, because Mars is going to be tough. It's going to require space technology. It's going to require an investment in space science. It's going to require, you know, all the things that NASA does very well, including, you know, what the commercial sector can do coming up behind us. So, you know, I'm going to be very interested in, you know, hearing your impression, Administrator Lightfoot. But again, I want to make sure that as we look at NASA as a multi-mission organization, we don't rob from Peter to pay Paul, but we actually adequately fund all those missions And as we go through our budgeting process, I think that'll be incredibly important. And Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to submit 4 documents for the record, including opinion pieces and statements related to NASA's fiscal year 29 budget proposal.
Without objection.
And I yield back.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to, I think I've got the name of the school where you students are from, the Lake Braddock Secondary School from Fairfax, Virginia. Is that correct? Well, welcome this morning. Any other schools participating this morning? Well, anyway, we welcome you. Thank you for being here. And as my friend Dr. Barra said, it's very gratifying to see young folks be interested in STEM studies. And our space program is not, you couldn't find a better place to come and participate and have aspirations to join in NASA. So thank you for being here. Let's see. Chairman Smith's not here. Ranking Member Johnson is not here. Okay, well, let me introduce the witnesses. Witness today, sorry about that, Mr. Administrator. Our witness today is Mr. Robert Lightfoot, Acting Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Before serving as Acting Administrator, Mr. Lightfoot served as the Associate Administrator, the highest-ranking civil servant at NASA. Before that, he was Director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. He managed propulsion, scientific, and space transportation activities. From 2003 to 2005, he served as Assistant Associate Administrator for the Space Shuttle Program at NASA's headquarters right here in Washington, where he oversaw technical and budgetary oversight of the annual budget and initial transition and retirement efforts for the shuttle infrastructure. From 2005 to 2007, Mr. Lightfoot was responsible for overseeing the manufacture, assembly, and operation of the primary shuttle propulsion elements, such as the main engines, solid rocket boosters, and reusable solid rocket motors. And we really appreciate all those long years of service. Mr. Lightfoot received a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. He was also named Distinguished Departmental Fellow for the university's Department of Mechanical Engineering in 2007, and was selected as a University of Alabama College of Engineering Fellow in 2009. So I'd like to now recognize Mr. Lightfoot for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you on the NASA's 2019 budget request. The request places NASA at the forefront of a global effort to advance humanity's future in space and expands on our nation's great capacity for exploration and innovation. NASA is focused on its core exploration mission and the many ways this mission returns value to the United States. Through this mission, NASA produces knowledge and discoveries, strengthens our economy and security, deepens partnerships with other nations, inspires the next generation, and helps to provide solutions to tough problems back here on Earth. This year's proposal initiates an exploration campaign. NASA will pursue exploration and development of the Moon and deep space by leading innovative new commercial and international partnerships, leveraging and advancing the work we've already been doing in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station. Our successful investment with a strong U.S. space industry in low Earth orbit allows us to focus our energies on farther horizons. As private companies continue their successful cargo missions to low Earth orbit, we will once again launch astronauts from American soil, beginning with test flights this year. In low Earth orbit, the International Space Station is our cornerstone of our integrated approach to deep space. We are dedicated to using the full potential of the station to demonstrate critical technologies, learn about human health in space, and focus commercial energies on the growing low Earth orbit economy. Further, we will accelerate the process of transitioning to commercial approaches to ensure a long-term human presence in LEO by the end of 2024. In the vicinity of the Moon and on its surface, the Space Launch System and Orion are critical backbone elements to provide us the transportation infrastructure to and from that location. The integrated launch of these systems in fiscal 2020 is on track, and the mission with crew in 2023 remains on track as well. In 2019, we'll have an important test of the Orion launch abort system to advance the critical safety knowledge for the upcoming missions. We'll also begin to build the in-space infrastructure for long-term exploration and development of the Moon. by delivering to the lunar orbit a power and propulsion element as the foundation of our Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway. This gateway will expand what humans can do in the lunar environment and provide opportunities to support those commercial and international missions to the surface that will help pioneer new technologies and exploration. Our plan will draw on the interest and capabilities of our industry and international partners as we develop progressively complex robotic missions to the surface of the moon with scientific and exploration objectives in advance of a human return. In collaboration with our robust scientific activity across NASA's portfolio, these new lunar robotic missions will stretch the capabilities of industry and international partners while returning science and knowledge we can use for future human missions. For the deep space domain, technology drives exploration, both human and robotic, and helps us solve problems in space and here on Earth. It lays the groundwork for our future missions and addresses many needs, including how we'll live in space, how we'll get there, and how those technologies will allow us to move further into space. We'll focus our technology investments on applications of the technology to deep space exploration and innovative ways to further our goals from concept to test to flight. In science, our incredible portfolio will continue to increase understanding of our planet and our place in the universe, pursue civilization-level discoveries, such as whether or not there's life elsewhere in the universe, and scout for knowledge to inform future human advancement into space. Our robust activity will include a Mars rover, a lander, sample return missions, diverse Earth and planetary missions, and spacecraft to study the sun and how it influences the very nature of space. Powerful observations will study other solar systems and their planets and peer back to the dawn of time through other galaxies. In aeronautics, NASA's work has always strengthened our security and economy, and our ongoing research and testing of new aeronautics technologies is critical in these areas. It will help us lead the world in global aviation economy with increasing benefits worldwide. Commercial supersonic flight, unmanned aviation systems, and the next generation of aircraft are some of the critical focuses of this important program to our nation. Our mission successes will continue to inspire the next generation, who's like the folks here with us today, to pursue science, technology, engineering, and mathematics studies, to ultimately join us on this journey of discovery and become part of that diverse workforce we'll need for tomorrow's critical aerospace careers. We'll use every opportunity to engage learners in our work and our missions. This budget places NASA, again, at the forefront of a global effort to advance humanity's future in space and draws on our nation's great capacity for innovation and exploration to raise the bar of human potential and improve life across the globe. Finally, on a personal note, I would like to thank Chairman Smith for his years of service to NASA and this country by his service on this committee. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. And the National Academy's Pathways report from 2014 included a sand chart that depicted the notional budget for exploration. So I would ask that you wouldn't mind, please pull up that chart. Thank you very much. The chart broke down funding for the ISS, for the SLS, Orion, as well as exploration technology and research. And the chart visualizes how, without significant increases to the exploration budget, the development of any new projects going forth would be delayed in order to accommodate the continued operation of the ISS on to 2028. Last March, this subcommittee held a hearing on the plans for the ISS after 2024, and at the hearing, we heard testimony about how slight increases to the exploration budget have allowed for some bit of flexibility to these projections. So I'd ask you to pull up the second chart, if you would. Turn this thing on. There we go. NASA's exploration budget request for FY19 is $10.5 billion, and while this is considerably more than was envisioned in the Pathways report, that $10.5 billion now includes approximately $1 billion in activities previously funded under the Space Technology Mission Directorate. And so let's assume that budget caps are not lifted significantly in the future. If the ISS is extended past the current authorized date of 2024, what new projects will be delayed? And would the Lunar Orbital Platform, or the Gateway, be delayed? Would it prevent the start of a human lunar excursion vehicle development until after the 2030s?
Well, I think if you look at the budget request we have, and where we're proposing to eliminate government funding for the ISS in 2025.
Right.
That's our intent, is to get, so we don't have to fund that in the future. And so the total program, though, when you look at it, what we want to do is work the Mars vicinity. We want to get the platform built. We want to build these robotic landers to and from the moon. While it's not a perfect transition from what we're doing in low Earth orbit, there's not like a switch we're going to flip and magically go there, right? What we want to use now this year, this budget year, is to go determine what are the commercial capabilities that would allow us to fill the gap that you show on your chart after 2024. What capabilities are going to be there? So you're going to see a series of announcements from us. We're trying to stimulate that with $150 million in this 2019 budget, and roughly, if in the out years, that would be $900 million over time, to see who can fill that slot, so we can move on and build those gateway pieces.
Okay.
That's the way we're looking at it.
Okay, thank you. And then second, if NASA transitions low Earth orbit operations to the private sector, how will NASA preserve the unique expertise and capabilities related to mission operations, program management, systems integration, including habitat, and astronaut training, among other core competencies that reside at Johnson Space Center? Is there a long-term strategic plan that clearly delineates core center roles? And for the past several years, every time we've asked headquarters, the answer has been we need to wait and see. So what say you about that?
Yeah, we've spent quite a bit of time in the last 2 or 3 years defining center roles and what the roles are. And of course, JSC, Johnson Space Center, has those roles that you described. We believe those roles continue as we move into the lunar platform. And we also, one of the other things we want to learn from the request for the commercial folks this upcoming year is what capabilities they want to depend on. Because mission operations, astronaut training, those are things we can offer and get reimbursed for as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. A backup plan for commercial crew. When the commercial crew partners experienced delays 2 years ago, NASA was able to maintain U.S. access to the station through the purchase of additional Soyuz seats through Boeing as a result of their sea launch settlement. Additional delays announced at their hearing earlier this year once again threatened U.S. access to the ISS. There are no more Soyuz seats to buy. Is NASA considering accepting additional risk by flying U.S. astronauts on commercial crew test flights? And if additional delays occur this spring, which is not out of the question, given the complexity of work over the next several weeks, is this risky option off the table? And are we in a position that we may need to scale back crew on the ISS? Will we have to front-load our agreement with the Russians to maintain a steady crew in the near term, which will end up costing us more in the out years to accommodate their cosmonauts on commercial providers? I know I'm trying to get these questions in before I run out, so if you could answer some of those, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so in the spirit of time here, we are looking at several options along that line.
Right.
I can tell you that we're working with the Russians, we're working with our commercial partners, but we maintain, we're still confident our commercial providers are going to provide us the capability we need, and we're just looking at contingencies in case that happens. What I would offer is our teams can come up and brief you on the different options we're looking at some point, brief our staff on that.
Okay, great, that's good. And I'm out of time, so I'd like to recognize Mr. Barrow now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Lightfoot, what's the basis for NASA focusing in on a core mission of exploration, specifically lunar exploration, when successive NASA authorization acts have emphasized the multi-mission role of NASA?
Yeah, I think what we're looking at, I think we still have a very balanced budget when you look across the multi-mission opportunities in science and aeronautics and technology, along with the exploration activity. What we're really trying to do here is focus on a long-term plan with our eye on Mars, ultimately, right? But we had to really start to define, and this committee has even asked us to do that multiple times. We had to define what we're going to do in the decade of 2020s to get ready to go to Mars. And I think what you see in this budget is a series of missions to the moon and the lunar vicinity. They're going to enable us to get to Mars ultimately. So I think we still have a good balanced budget from that standpoint.
And as we look at that return to a lunar mission, I think we've talked about this in this committee multiple times, that return has to be in the context of learning something new that allows us to go on to the next capabilities. I know we've asked for that human exploration roadmap, you know, that talks about these interim destinations that allow us to go further. Without that roadmap, you know, it becomes difficult for us to evaluate kind of the exploration campaign. When do you think we're going to get that roadmap?
You should get it by the end of the month.
By the end of this month, okay. And then what are the, you know, again, in my opening statement, I expressed some concerns about robbing Peter to pay Paul, and, you know, again, the concerns of not having as well-rounded a multi-mission portfolio. And what are the short-term and long-term impacts of giving human exploration precedence over other priorities that were outlined in multiple decadal surveys?
Yeah, I think when you look at the priorities that we have today, we're still meeting the majority of our science priorities going forward. We're going to launch tests, for instance, this upcoming year. We've got James Webb going out, so the astrophysics area is in pretty good shape. From that standpoint, we'd like to look at more integration between our human exploration and science missions. And so when you look at the lunar activity we're doing, it's not just lunar science that we're looking at. We're looking at other science we can do from the area of the moon to meet the objectives in maybe different ways than we have in the past that are in the decadals. So our science team is looking at that as we go forward.
Okay. And, you know, you know, I made reference in my opening statement that, you know, in the 60s when we challenged ourselves to put a person on the moon, it didn't change, the focus of the mission didn't change from one administration to the next. You had both Democratic and Republican presidents, you know, focused on that Apollo mission. And I do think there's some concern as we go from one administration to another, and you know, certainly I'd be curious from the NASA perspective. It's got to be difficult as you're trying to plan these longer-term missions if focus changes from one administration to another. And how can we in Congress? We don't tend to turn over every 4 years. Hopefully, some of us are here for a while to help guide that process along. And again, we recognize it's Congress's job, it's the House's job to set the budget priorities and give you that budget. And you know, your job as administrator to implement that budget. What are some things that we can do to avoid a shift every 4 years, but allow you to do your job of focusing in on that mission to Mars in 2033? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think from our end, we think that this particular budget proposal just provides some clarity and context in terms of trying to still get to Mars as an you know, kind of that horizon goal that we've talked about before. And what we're seeing is that we can use the lunar vicinity and lunar surface a more detailed and a better understanding of what we can do there to actually help us go there. The gateway is a critical piece of this. We are not just going to the moon, we're going to the lunar vicinity. We believe the gateway can also be a launching point to go to Mars, but we got to build it first, right? So we haven't really, it's not as big a change in my mind as maybe it looks like overall in terms of the exploration planning. But what you guys can do is what you always do is hold us accountable to make sure we're doing the same things that you want us to do from an overall perspective. I will tell you, multi-decadal missions like we're talking about doing here are difficult in 1 year increments.
Right.
Right. And that continuity and that is very important to us for us to keep going as well, not just from the policy standpoint, but from the budgeting perspective.
And so, since it's our job to hold you accountable, do you feel the budget as proposed will give you enough of that multi-mission focus and enough of that multi-decadal focus to continue focusing in on that long-term mission?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, and I'll yield back.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrow. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to congratulate you, Mr. Lightfoot, on once again today setting a new record as the longest serving acting director of NASA. I hope you'll have an extension of that record tomorrow. We'll see if the Senate ever acts on who's supposed to be nominated by the president. Now, how much steel and aluminum does NASA use? Do you have any judgment about that?
I have no idea, sir.
Well, I mean, you use steel in the launch platforms, and of course, aluminum, that's one of the metals used in alloys or directly in providing lightweight launch vehicles, commercial crew vehicle, all those things, correct?
It's usually different materials than that. I mean, we use a lot of aluminum, I'm sure. I can't tell you how much, though.
Has this administration's proposed NASA budget taken into account the higher costs for steel and aluminum that would be anticipated because of the proposed 10% aluminum and 25% steel tariffs?
No.
All right, I hope.
It was developed before that, so.
Okay, I hope you'll take that into account, and hopefully it will be minimal, but if it's not and it's something we need to adjust for, then we do need that information. In March of last year, the committee held a hearing on the future of the International Space Station. More recently, the President's budget proposes additional funding to stimulate low Earth orbit commercialization. Would you please discuss NASA's current thinking on commercialization and transition strategies for the International Space Station?
Yes, sir. We think that the commercial industry is really on the precipice of really being able to take over that area. We need another destination, perhaps other than ISS, or use the International Space Station as a destination, maybe operated by others. Our planning and our thoughts here are that if we're going to do this, we need to talk about it now and not later on, if we're going to, because of the way the budget works. So what we want to do this year is we want to do a series of calls to see what people are doing, ask for their business plan, their business proposal, what are they going to do, whether it's use the ISS, have a standalone activity in low Earth orbit, but ultimately develop a destination in low Earth orbit that our commercial partners can go to, that we and our international partners can use going forward.
If NASA is unable to reduce its costs for operating the International Space Station by 2025, and if the low Earth orbit commercialization activity does not bear fruit, what should the United States do regarding its presence on the International Space Station at that point?
Yeah, I think the real question is what is the research we can get, the research and science value in low Earth orbit that we will get from an International Space Station or another entity. And I think that's a discussion we'll have once we get the data back that tells us what we need to go do, and we'll bring back a budget that addresses it. We'll have to make that decision based on the technologies and the research that we need to do, whether we can accomplish it in low Earth orbit or in our future move out toward the moon.
Each commercial crew provider is required to fly an uncrewed flight, followed by a crewed test flight before beginning International Space Station crew missions. Originally, commercial crew providers were required to fly functioning environmental control and life support systems on their uncrewed flights. These systems provide oxygen to astronauts, absorb carbon dioxide, provide heating and cooling for the crew, and maintain atmospheric pressure. Recently, SpaceX was granted a waiver by NASA to fly their first test flight without these systems. What is NASA's reasoning for skipping this stage? And that's assuming the information I have is correct. First, is the information I have correct?
I'm not 100% sure, but what I will tell you is no matter what we do when we fly crew, we will have the safety policy in place that we need, and we'll have the risk management appropriately around those activities. So I'll take that for the record to get back with you in terms of exactly what we've agreed to there on that, from that standpoint. But no matter what the first crewed flight is for us, it will have the right safety checks that we would normally do and require before we fly crews on those missions.
Well, thank you. I look forward to getting that information back, and also if the proposed tariffs on aluminum and steel do affect the NASA's budget, if you could get that back to us too, so that we can ensure that NASA is properly funded.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Dr. Babin. Mr. Lightfoot, thank you for your service. Thanks for sitting and staying in this position as acting administrator. You've been doing it for a long time. You were associate administrator before that. Just in a few words, is it time to have somebody who's permanent in that position? Is it hard as an acting administrator to move the agency forward?
I think, from my perspective on that, as the one sitting in that chair, it is always a value to have the person the president wants in this position. And I think that would be important for us all from that standpoint. But I can tell you, for the past year, I've had no trouble having access to the people I need to have access to. I've been involved. I've been to both space councils. I've had a chair. I haven't had to sit in the back row. I've sat right at the table, as the administrator would be. But there is value in having the approved presidential nominee in the chair.
Okay, well, thank you. I don't know if the students over here, are you from Lake Braddock? Okay, so I know a lot of your classmates just left, but I'm just curious of you all, any of you plan to be astronauts or work in the space program? If, by a show of hands, I'd be curious. Oh, you're all going to be doctors in the healthcare business, right? All right, well, I'm sorry the rest of them left because I'm a lawyer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not any of that, but I love science fiction on Star Wars and Star Trek and Men in Black and Back to the Future. So some of what we're doing here, it reminds me of Back to the Future. A real effort on exploration, a real desire to do that, but when we were in the 60s, there was a real investment in getting to the moon. Or, you know, as the administrator knows, I want to get our astronauts to Mars by 2033, which the orbits of Mars and Earth are close, and it saves a lot of space travel and potential danger to our astronauts. But I guess, Mr. Administrator, my question is this. There is an emphasis on exploration, but it seems to be at the expense of a lot of the other missions of NASA, one of which is the Science or the Space Technology Mission Directorate. And I have a letter from one of your former colleagues, Bobby Braun, who's now a dean at the University of Colorado, in effect criticizing that, the loss of that directorate. And for the record, I'd like to introduce this letter, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
So my question to you, sir, is, and some of the other questions that Mr. Brooks asked, the chairman asked, Dr. Barra, it seems to me that in this process of focusing on the moon with a hope to get to Mars, that we're losing a lot of the other science elements and a lot of the other Earth science programs at the expense of this exploration effort. Is that true?
I don't believe it is. In fact, I would argue that our technology budget, when you look at it today, the exploration, research, and technology budget that we've proposed is $1 billion. Today, the space technology budget is roughly $700 million. So what we've done is we've aligned that technology budget with the exploration initiatives, and that particular part of the budget will now focus on what we call our long poles to getting to Mars, things like in-space propulsion, radiation safety, advanced life support that we need to actually take crews to Mars, and our entry, descent, and landing activities that we're doing at Mars that we don't have to worry about at the moon. So I think we still have a very balanced portfolio going forward, and I think just the alignment and the focus from an exploration standpoint is what you're seeing out of this budget.
Do you think you're putting the building blocks in place to get our astronauts to Mars by 2033?
We're putting the building blocks in place. I don't know if we're going to get to 2033 or not, but we're putting the building blocks in place that we need with the systems we're putting around the moon and on the moon.
I heard you say, and I think this was your quote, we're going to try to get to Mars in the 30s. Try. Another of one of my movies, Star Wars, Yoda said, do or do not.
There is no try. Absolutely, I know it will. I use it with my team all the time.
All right, so, you know, I think that this committee has been, you know, in Congress it's pretty fractious sometimes, but this committee has been pretty solid in wanting to support the mission, the overall mission of NASA, exploration, science, earth science, deep space, and I think this committee will be behind NASA in getting this done. Part of me feels like a lot of this budget was written by the Office of Management and Budget, which I'm not happy about. So I want you to know the support that I think you have among all of us, Democrats and Republicans. And I want to thank you again for your service, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and this is one of those rare occasions. Well, actually, it's not. We agree with my friend from Colorado just expressed a concern about the Space Technology Mission Directorate, and I too am concerned about that, and I join him in expressing that. I have a letter as well for the record that I would submit for the record today, and I hope you would pay attention to that. So, and for the sake of our high school and students there, yeah, my friend from Colorado and I agree on this. We're working on it. That's the type of bipartisanship that this committee is known for and America's Space Program is known for. However, let me note that we have today, and this is for the kids, we don't have a full-time administrator of NASA. We have this temporary administrator here. This is not, however, a product of partisanship. This is not political. He's been in for a year. We have a good candidate, a great candidate, but yet we have to face the job with someone who's in the job temporarily. This is a product of a couple of senators who are bullheaded, and a couple of senators who are basically watching out for their own little domain rather than what's good for the overall of the country. And let me just put that on the record so the kids recognize that it's not politics. It could happen in either. This is not a political party-based outcome. It's based on the fact that there's several people over in the Senate have demonstrated an arrogance that is unacceptable and makes things not work as well in Washington, D.C. Let me note, now that we've talked a little bit about some of the other things, as you know, over the years, and when we're talking about kids, there's a big threat to these kids. There's a big threat to the people of the world, and it's the one thing that we seem to be ignoring, and I don't think that we're paying enough attention to it in this budget and others, and that is, at any time, there could be an asteroid or a near-Earth object that could come and wipe out half the world, if not the entire planet. Their generation needs to know that we are preparing now for some way to defend this Earth, global defense, if indeed something is determined is actually sighted 10 years out, and we can do that, so that we could change the actual trajectory of an object like this. Now, that is not something that's likely to happen, but it could happen. And if it does happen, it'll mean your entire generation is wiped out. So for these kids and for the planet in general, shouldn't we be doing more of that? And for example, NeoCam is something that is absolutely necessary to see if an object would be coming from the sun. Is there any money in this budget for NeoCam?
Yeah, for the total picture of planetary protection is what we call it. We have an office, planetary protection office in the agency.
Right.
And what we do there is we've increased the budget to do more observations that we're required to do. But we've also funded a mission called DART, which is going to be a mission that goes out and potentially determines whether we can deflect an asteroid or not. And we continue the technology work on NeoCam. We do not have the NeoCam mission yet, but the technology associated with what would become a mission is being
Well,
funded.
this is something that's important, even though the chances of a horrible occasion like this are small, but the consequences would be incredible, catastrophic. In terms of your science and budget and the fact that there seems to be a limitation on what earth science that has been mentioned. Let me just note that today we do have commercial companies that are capable of doing things they couldn't do 30 years ago, especially in the terms of remote sensing and Earth observation. There's no reason in the world why, if a private company can do something and make a profit at it, that we should take our limited budget for NASA and spend it on something that could be done and made a profit on in the private sector. So I would think that that's one thing that we should be made sure we facilitate companies to get in, make a profit at doing those things in observation and sensing that they can do and make a profit at. Lastly, I'd like to bring up another major impediment, and I've got 1 second to do it, and it's debris. And again, one thing that we can do as a government is work together with other governments, I might add, and other countries that want to do things in space to help clear the debris that's limiting what we can accomplish in space. What do we have on space debris?
Yeah, we continue to work on the technologies, and I think this is a topic we've brought up with Scott Pace, the Executive Secretary for the Space Council.
Right.
Is to look at an integrated policy because we all have an interest in this across the government.
Well, I hope so, and I would let me just say that, again, if we can just give these young people a world in which they don't have to, in which their opportunities are present, but by not doing things about debris or a possible threat from an asteroid, we're doing a great disservice to the next generation. So thank you
Okay.
for doing your part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
We're
Thank
working
you.
together on that.
I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service. I know it's tough. I'd like to just start with one sort of big picture item. Is it a correct reading of that plot that we looked at earlier, that with a flat budget, you don't get to the moon and you certainly don't get to Mars? Is that a correct?
I think it would be quite a challenge with a flat budget to do that.
Right, and that's true both for a flat budget and one that's even inflation adjusted, that flat including inflation.
Yeah, we think that, we actually think including inflation, we can do this. We've done the models, we've run the numbers to say if we
And
get
that assumes shutting down the ISS at some appropriate.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
without shutting down the ISS, it's a non-starter.
Again, it depends on when we shut it down, because that study showed 24 and 28. I mean, there's options in there in the middle, if that makes sense. I mean, there's other times we can do
No,
it.
yeah, you can shut it down when you decide to.
Right.
But you need that money to even return to the moon.
I believe so, to build the entire system to do that, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, and then now if
And
you talk about.
That's why we have the plan we have, right? It's what we're showing to get off of it in 2024.
Now, if you talk about missions to Mars, an obvious suggestion is to have international partners, taking a significant fraction of that. There's a lot and growing enthusiasm among, other countries. And what is your attitude towards collaboration for a Mars mission with other countries?
Yeah, all of this we're trying to do, we think is going to be a great opportunity, not only for industry partners in the country, but also international partners. Last week I was in Japan at the International Space Exploration Forum, and I was able to brief all our international partners that work with us on the space station on what we're trying to do. They're all very interested in coming forward to help us, not only at the moon, but also as we go to Mars. That's our plan all along, is to include that. That's one of the differences between the 60s and now, is we have other players that want to come and be part of this. They just need us to lead.
And the other thing that is potentially really changing are the increased capabilities of artificial intelligence and robotics. That you have robots today doing things that are, could only be done by people, even a few years ago. And so this is an opportunity to really knock some cost out of future missions by either having, robots precede people, it seems like there is a shift in focus in that direction now, where you're talking about, relatively sophisticated robotic first missions, and then deferring the much more expensive manned component, as necessary to meet your budgetary constraints.
Yeah, we're using robotics today, to your point, we're using robotics on the International Space Station, actually doing things robotically that 10 years ago we needed crew time for. We'll take things, when SpaceX flies to the station today, for instance, they carry instruments in the trunk in the unpressurized cargo area for the SpaceX. While the crew's asleep, we take the arm, we pull it out, we do it all robotically from the ground. You can do the same thing from the platform at the moon. You can do robotic operations of landers on the moon, so it goes both ways.
Sure. You can have,
and the
the old
advances are
dream.
incredible.
Yeah, the old dream of having self-replicating factories on the moon, using completely robotic equipment, these sort of things. People are making, prototypes of components of that on Earth, and it's something that actually the next generation should get very excited about, because these sort of, prototype facilities on Earth could really lead the way for, orders of magnitude reduction in the cost of future missions.
Yeah, we believe our International Space Station lets us demonstrate that in space as well.
Okay, now in my last time, I'd like to go to something very microscopically focused, which is the choice of using high-enriched uranium or low-enriched uranium for power sources. There is a huge difference in the danger, the proliferation danger and the terrorist danger between high-enriched uranium and low-enriched uranium. If you have weapons-grade high-enriched uranium and a terrorist steals it, they can, without much sophistication, make a nuclear weapon. On the other hand, if they steal low-enriched uranium, they have to go and build a centrifuge hall and so on. And so it's almost useless to them. And so, you know, I'm a little puzzled why you seem to have both high enriched uranium and low enriched uranium for propulsion and for surface power in different parts of your program. And I was wondering specifically, have you looked at the real cost of security when you choose high enriched uranium? That means you need armed guards, you need barbed wire, you need everything. And it's very expensive because of the terrorist threat if you choose high enriched uranium. You know, it does make a slightly more compact design for typical reactor applications. But I'd encourage you to look hard at seeing if you can lead the world in standardizing on low enriched uranium.
Yeah, we've been working on technologies for that, for the exact reason you're talking about. It is high enriched uranium creates a lot of extra challenges there. We've been looking at for power and propulsion. What I'd like to do is let our team bring you, provide you a report on what we've been doing in LEU and how we're trying to use it in the applications we see going forward. Would that be okay?
Yeah, it'd be very good. Yeah, I mean, there was a letter from a long list of Nobel Prize winners just focusing on how the United States should lead. There's a danger also that countries which are not necessarily nuclear countries will say we need a large inventory of high enriched uranium, not to build bombs, but for their space program. And so if there's a technological way to avoid this, I just really encourage you to try to lead the world towards exclusively using non-weapons grade uranium for your programs.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman's time has expired, and I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is always a challenge on the Republican side to follow Mr. Robacher from California, but here we go. A number of my colleagues have touched on this question, Acting Director, about the nature of the agency and the ability of the things to be done that are necessary in this environment we work in with an Acting Director. And you're a long-term career guy, and you've done an outstanding job and a very good role as Acting Director. But ultimately, as my friends are noting here, in the environment we work in, the resources that the agency needs in the long term, having a director nominated and confirmed by the United States Senate from the administration is critically important, and I think we would all agree on that. And while this body can't really give advice to that other institution, and notice I was very careful in my phraseology there, nonetheless, having a full-time director is a critically important thing. And I spent 5 or 6 years sitting next to the OMB director on a subcommittee of another committee, and I understand how challenging the circumstances can be there. So we need someone, and I agree with my colleagues. Another observation in general sense I would note, my friend from Colorado's focus on having people on Mars by 2033. That would make me 73 years old. I would like to be alive for this great accomplishment. And while I come from reasonably decent genetics, once we get past the mid-80s, it starts to be a little questionable. So I want to help you get there and the agency get there. So for a comment or two in the weeds, now that we've discussed indirectly Mr. Mulvaney and the environment we're working in, NASA's expressed an interest in building a second mobile launch platform for the SLS as a way to address some of the scheduling pressure on the first crewed mission of SLS and Orion. And I was looking through your request, and I noticed the second platform's not included. What effect would building a second mobile launch platform, rather than modifying an existing platform, have on the launch schedule for SLS and Orion, and what would the cost be? Thinking about our justifications to our other friends in government about why we need the resources to do things.
Yeah, I think we took a hard look at that during this cycle, and what the advantage of a second mobile launch platform gives you is I could fly on the mobile launch platform I'm building today, and I could potentially fly Orion if I bought another interim cryogenic propulsion stage, an upper stage, so I could fly quicker, fly humans quicker, probably 2022 timeframe. The opposite of that is it costs. It's a pretty expensive proposition to build a new mobile launcher and to buy another interim cryogenic propulsion stage. And so just as we had the discussion, we had the debate, and our answer came back, we just should stick with our plan that we've got. So, I mean, that was the difference. We can provide you the numbers. Be glad to provide the costs associated with that to the committee.
I would be fascinated by the numbers,
Okay.
Director, because that's one of the issues that we as a committee need to take up in our work with the appropriators. If we really want to get there in 2033 or a day or two earlier, providing those necessary resources. Now let's touch for a moment, are the flat nominal, top-line out-year numbers on the budget request a result of the decision to keep funding flat, or are they simply placeholders for subsequent requests that the administration will be making as the long-term formula gets put together, as all the pieces come into place in the administration?
Yeah, we believe that our job is to present the budget we need every year to OMB, and so without years being notional, I don't really think about them either way, as placeholders or direction. I just think we have to present our budget going forward, so.
Another observation that I would make to my colleagues on the committee, that it's our responsibility to address some of these long-term issues, our responsibility to focus the resources to do what is in the common good and the best interest. Just one casual question to conclude with, Director. Tell us about the funding situations and circumstances of James Webb. Are we still on track? We still have the resources necessary to help it live up to its potential?
Yeah, we believe we have the resources necessary now. We're in a pretty significant review from a schedule standpoint about when we'll launch it. We're having some challenges with a couple of the technical parts of the spacecraft, not the telescope part, but the actual spacecraft bus that's being built. The telescope's already delivered and it's ready to go. We've gone through the testing. They're around the sun shield and around some of the propulsion elements associated with that. So I'm supposed to get briefed by the end of the month on where we are, and we'll obviously let everybody know where we are from that standpoint.
And I bring that up, as important as the manned program is, nonetheless, your satellites in orbit around the Earth have provided us with, as my mother would have said, a lot of Buck Rogers moments in the last 20 years. And we need to continue that focus and generating the imagination of our fellow citizens. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas. And I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Christ.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Lightfoot, for being with us today. We appreciate the situation you're in, and thank you for your tenacity in the mission. And you may have addressed some of these things. I had to step out for a meeting or two. During your State of NASA address last month, you mentioned that the administration is putting NASA, quote, on a path to return to the moon with an eye towards Mars. That's a interestingly worded statement, and I appreciate that. That seems to avoid a firm commitment as to either of the two objectives may be accomplished. And while it's clear that this fiscal year 2019 budget focuses heavily on lunar exploration, I am a bit concerned that the administration may be shying away from Mars. Can you elaborate on that? And you may have already, so forgive me if that's the case.
No, it's fine. I'll be glad to articulate where I think we are. I think we are still keeping an eye on Mars for sure. And the technologies I mentioned earlier around that we're going to still continue to fund. There's some pretty long, what we call long poles challenges to get to Mars, entry, descent, and landing, in space propulsion, advanced life support, radiation protection for the crews as we go there. These are big challenges for us. So we're going to keep working on those while we build the systems that we're building at the moon that we think are going to be extensible to get us to Mars. The gateway is a critical piece of that. If we could have decided to just go to the moon from Earth, right? And that would have not been extensible to do anything to get to Mars. But the fact that we're going to build a platform that allows us to operate to and from the platform to the moon can also be the platform we use to operate to and from to Mars. So that's I think that's a pretty nuanced difference from a technical perspective in terms of this architecture.
Where do you think we are in terms of the timing of a Mars mission?
Well, you know, as Congressman Permo said, he wants 2033. I think what we'll do is see how much progress we make in the lunar vicinity and building those systems we need and knocking down the technical requirements. But it will be no earlier than 2033. How about that? I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Is there an opportunity, do you think, for the private sector to assist NASA in getting humans to Mars?
Absolutely. They're not only an opportunity, we're expecting them to help. I mean, they're helping today by helping us with low Earth orbit, the activity we're doing from a cargo perspective and ultimately a crew perspective, and even some of the systems that we have on the International Space Station. We want to leverage that in a big way as we move forward, because the more they can do, the more I can move out going forward. So it's the entire system of what we're doing in low Earth orbit, around the moon, and getting to Mars that's going to need international cooperation. It's going to need American industry and commercial folks to come forward, and then the NASA team themselves. And I think that's what's important, is to look at that total spectrum.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The budget proposes to end direct funding for the International Space Station in 2025. When under this proposal, the station would be transferred to commercial management and control, will the research being done on the space station to mitigate the risk of extended space travel on humans be completed by 2025?
Well, we have a roadmap for doing that research, obviously. The important thing is we're not going to quit doing research. We'll be doing research around the moon on the reaction to what happens to humans as well. That's part of our discussion this upcoming year is what do we need to do and what commercial platforms can actually provide us the same research that we get on the International Space Station. So we will get the research done that we need to do to move humans forward, but we don't ever stop researching for humans no matter where we are at the moon or even at Mars.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Lightfoot. I'll yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Dr. Dunn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Babin, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to stay on the same line of questioning, if I may, and ask you to elaborate a little more about the transfer of the space station to the commercial sector or private sector. How exactly does that work?
Well, part of it is, so we have to coordinate with our international partners too. I want to be really clear as they're part of the International Space Station today. What we're really looking for is...
Are all the governments stepping at, or just ours? It's just ours.
Yeah, we've just proposed it, and we've been talking to them going forward. But today, all the governments were agreed to are to 2024. If we go past 2024, all the governments are going to have to agree to as well.
So a new negotiation, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's not a difficult thing. It may be difficult for them in their ministries and all the different things they do. But what's really important here is we think when you look at the rise of the commercial entities and their abilities and the things they're bringing, where there's the habitats, we got a tremendous amount of interest in our next step, BAA, the broad area announcement around habitats. We think by 2025, there's great potential for them to have orbiting platforms in low Earth orbit. It doesn't have, some of them might want to use the International Space Station, some may want to stand alone. So the plan would be those come along, and if they do, we can get our research done and use them, just basically buy that as a service for our needs going forward. So this next year, we'll ask folks for that kind of feedback. We'll get that kind of feedback from all these companies, and we'll see where they really are, which allows us to influence our 2020 submit based on what that date might be.
So on the same theme of reorganization here, you stated that NASA plans to reorganize the Human Exploration Operations Directorate and Space Technology Mission Directorate. Can you also elaborate on that transition?
Yeah, so the goal here is to move what the Space Technology Mission Director today into an exploration, research, and technology arm. And we're still working the details around the organization. We owe that back in the spring. And what we're really trying to do is make sure our technologies that we're working on are truly aligned with the things we're trying to do at the moon and ultimately at Mars, as I talked about some of the technology we got to work on before. And we think having them housed under one organization, while today I'm very comfortable, I really am pretty comfortable with the alignment, there's things we're doing in technology that may not be aligned. There's other things. And so we're trying to make sure they're all focused and having them under one spectrum, so I know what I'm doing in low Earth orbit, I know what I'm doing in the moon, and I know what I'm doing in my technologies. I can make sure those are integrated and not on their own. So that's what we're trying to do.
I'm going to lower our altitude just a little bit here. I'd like you to elaborate on the X-plane program, which is fascinating to me. And by the X-plane, I think you mean the low boom.
Yes.
But are there other X-planes you're working on?
Yes, we have a plan ultimately, I think, for 4 X-planes in what we call our new aviation horizons. The first is the low boom supersonic demonstrator, flight demonstrator.
Feel pretty confident about that?
Absolutely.
Great.
Feel very confident. I think you'll see some announcements probably in the next month about some selections we've made moving forward.
I'm going to hold you to that.
You can on that one. Pretty excited about that. And the goal there, of course, obviously, is to create supersonic transport across the continental United States, which we can't do today, right? Can we provide a demonstrator that allows the commercial market to learn from that configuration and move forward? The next demonstrator, the next X-plane is what we call X-57 Maxwell. It's an all-electric aircraft. And so that's the next one. And then we're continuing working on subsonic technologies, which is a flight technology from a subsonic perspective. That would be the next demonstrator. It's not in this budget, but that would be the next one, be a third one even. And we just think, I just think it's critical that we stay engaged from an aviation and aeronautics technology perspective.
It is.
It's a huge global market that we don't want to get out of.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that NASA hasn't lost sight of the atmospheric efforts.
Not at all.
So that's very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Appreciate your answers, Mr. Lightfoot.
Yes, sir, thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Mr. Lightfoot, thank you very much for being here. In your testimony, you mentioned that the budget request provides for, quote, critical infrastructure indispensable to the nation's access and use of space. And you discussed the importance of maintaining the ISS and supplying both crew and cargo through NASA's commercial cargo partners. I certainly agree that those are very important priorities, which is why I want to discuss the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. The Space Launch Range at Wallops is technically NASA's only launch range, considering that launchers from Kennedy Space Center in Florida use the Air Force's Eastern Range. In FY 2018, the National Defense Authorization Act, the Congress established a Launch Support and Infrastructure Modernization Program for DoD's Eastern Range in Florida and the Western Range in California. I'm concerned because there appears to be no similar program within NASA to sustain and invest in launch range assets for Wallops, which are also used for your mobile range missions in the U.S. and around the world. Even more troubling, the FY 2019 President's budget request did not include any funding for the 21st Century Launch Complex Program, which has been used to fund some of these needs at Wallops in the absence of a dedicated launch range program. This committee included its support for the continuation of the 21st Century Launch Complex Program in the 2017 NASA Transition Act, but I'm disappointed the budget request didn't follow along with this committee's recommendation. So I was encouraged that Chairman Culberson, who's the ranking member Serrano, and the House Commerce Justice Science Appropriations Subcommittee continued funding for this program in their FY18 bill, and I know that my colleagues and I will be pushing for this again in our eventual FY19 Appropriations Act. So my question is, how is NASA investing in upgrades at Wallops to improve the launch range infrastructure? And why is there no dedicated range improvement programs for NASA's range as there are for the DoD ranges?
Yeah, so what we typically do from an infrastructure standpoint is we'll build the infrastructure, and then once a program comes in to operate it, they inherit the infrastructure costs. So we'll do kind of do the upfront investment in that, and then we let the programs like commercial cargo that flies out of Wallops, as you know, sounding rockets programs, the balloons programs, they support the infrastructure that's there. So that's where we are. What I will do is I don't know the exact details of what we're funding there from an infrastructure perspective, but we have an infrastructure process through our Office of Strategic Infrastructure that allows us to look for modernization and investment. And what I'll do, sir, is I'll just provide you what we're doing at Wallops inside that budget.
Okay, that'd be great, because the companion question is, though, wouldn't the continuation of the 21st Century Launch Complex funding help address some of the backlog, continue to make NASA's range more competitive, basically just strengthen NASA's only range at Wallops?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously it would, but we fund that out of our safety, security, and mission support area, which is our kind of our institutional area, and that's an area that gets challenged quite often. So let us get you the data on where we are. I'd rather not just try to do it off the top of my head from that standpoint.
Okay, great. Mr. Chair, that's all I have, so I yield back.
Yes, sir, thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lightfoot, for being here. You have been an adequate acting administrator. You've done a great job. We appreciate your leadership, so no offense to you, but I hope next time we're sitting here that Administrator Bridenstine will be in the chair. It's an embarrassment to the process that hasn't happened yet, but we appreciate the leadership that you provided in the meantime. I want to ask you a little bit about the W-FIRST mission. This project was a top priority for astronomers in the last decadal survey. What would be the consequence of canceling the mission, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the big consequence is the gap in astrophysics data that we would get from the W-FIRST. I mean, to the astrophysics community, that's a challenge from a scientific perspective. The positive side of that, though, is that those funds can perhaps get the data in a different way, and I think that's what our science mission director is going to look at.
So you would agree that it would undermine the decadal survey?
It's just definitely what the decadal survey has asked for, but we think there's other ways to get that same data.
You do, okay. Well, many of the important parts of the spacecraft for the W-FIRST mission have already been completed. Would you agree?
I'm not sure I would
For
agree.
example, Harris Corporation, which is a major employer in my district, several hundred constituents of mine have completed construction of the optical assembly. So how much of this spacecraft for the mission has already been completed?
Yeah, can I get you those numbers? Can I just provide them for the record? Because I don't want to do it off the top of my head, but there's quite a bit more to go.
Okay. Please do. Thank you very much.
launched.
Can we really expect, though, substantial savings, given the amount of work, do you believe, that has already gone into the W1st mission?
I think when you see the numbers, when you're looking at a $3.2 to $3.9 billion mission, we have not spent nearly that much at this point.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to seeing those figures. I know the Webb Space Telescope has already been mentioned. It continues to experience several complications on the path to being ready to fly. Given the intricacy of the design with no room for error in the deployment, how would NASA's ability to conduct deep science if W1st was canceled and if there were further problems with the Webb telescope after it was launched?
Yeah, I think that's the balance and the challenge that we're counting on. We're counting on Tess and James Webb to fill the astrophysics needs for quite a bit of time. So clearly, if we had a challenge with James Webb, that would be something we'd have to look at.
Okay, and finally, in this day of ever-changing innovation and technological advancements, could you explain the reasoning for merging the Space Technology Mission Directorate with an operations organization?
Yeah, I think when you look at the way there's really three lines of business in here. There's the low Earth orbit activities where International Space Station is. There's the lunar vicinity area, what we're going to do at the surface of the moon and around the moon. And then there's deeper space exploration, which includes Mars. If you're going to have a stepping stone approach, those three stepping stones need to kind of be aligned together. And so that's what we're trying to do. And if you look at the total budget, it's actually a better budget for technology than we had. It's a standalone mission directorate, and it'll be more aligned and more focused, we believe, with what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all I got. I yield back.
Yes, sir, thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Knight.
Mr. Lightfoot, thank you. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for hiring my legislative director and taking him away from me. I'm sure he's doing as good a job for you as he did for me. You know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the big A. So the LBFD, the UEST, these are kind of projects that I think would advance mankind. It would definitely advance this country. And I'm going to jump on an airplane tomorrow, and I'm going to go 0.7 Mach, hopefully, if the winds aren't so bad. But if I jumped on an airplane in 1968, I'd be going 0.7 Mach across this country. And so for about 62 years, it's been that. Coming east, we get to go a little faster. Going west, we get to go a little slower, but that's about where we are. And so I think the LBFD and then even transitioning a little bit into ultra-efficient subsonic transport and saving fuel costs and putting the same amount of people into the airplane, but saving those fuel costs, maybe making a little wider seats for me too, would be a big, big deal to advancing mankind and taking that step that maybe we haven't taken in the last 60-some years. So that's just my pitch to continue to push on that. New Horizons, and this is a big part of that, but all of the X-planes, and I think that Dr. Dunn started on what you're doing with the X-57, and I know that that's progressing very well, and what we're doing with the low-boom flight demonstrator. What else are we seeing in the future outside of what I've kind of just stated?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we're working on in aeronautics that are just as important in my opinion, and that's integrating unmanned systems into the airspace. Our teams at Ames are working really hard on that. Well, all over the country, frankly, are working on that with our partners at FAA and how we would go about doing that. You can see the proliferation that's happening everywhere. There's personal air mobility coming along. And we're involved in the technology and research around that. Hypersonics, we're involved in that from a very much a research perspective. So those are all in that budget that go with the X-planes that you talked about, and very important to us, and I think.
So hypersonics, over the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a lot of advancements to get us to probably a position where hypersonics are very achievable, very reachable. NASA has been a big part of that, and industry has been a big part of that. I think that we're going to see that, not just from what NASA can do with hypersonics, but from a national defense situation. Hypersonics are very, very important, and moving forward with new technologies, new ceramics, and new materials that make those things achievable. I'm going to push over into another realm. We've got some companies out there that are doing some innovative things, and one of them's in Mojave. It's a Paul Allen company called Stratolaunch. Stratolaunch is going to fly an airplane this year, a very large airplane. And when they do that, they're going to kind of bring a new realm into what we can do for space launch, because that airplane will be able to fly at a couple different airports, depending on the taxiways, and they'll be able to launch differently than just on the West Coast and just on the East Coast, is what we hope. Do you see a good partnership with companies like that, and with Stratolaunch and things like that?
Yeah, I think we have our launch services process that we have inside the agency, and flight opportunities process we have inside the agency really allows new entrants to come in. We have a really good on-ramping way for them to demonstrate their capability and become part of our toolbox to get our missions done. So yeah, absolutely, we see an opportunity for those folks.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer, that this could be part of the toolbox. This is part of the future. And then closer to home to me, that not many people know about, but everybody's talked about the James Webb Telescope, and so I'm going to talk about SOFIA. All of the things that SOFIA does, how is that doing?
It still continues to fly its missions. We constantly, not only do we fly the missions, we're engaging a lot of educators in that process as we go forward. The data's coming back. It'll go through senior review in a couple of years, just like all our missions do, and we'll see, it'll get a good assessment of the science value versus the cost, and that's what we'll do. So
Yeah.
it's still over in Germany right now under its annual maintenance period, so
Correct.
looking forward to get it back here I think we get it back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Now I yield back.
Thank you very much. And, yeah, we'll take a second round here. And tell you what, I'll call on you first there, Mr. Barrow, gentleman from California.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got a quick question, and again, appreciate the service, Acting Administrator. And, when you talked about the space technology budget increasing from $700 million to $1 billion, we're happy about that, obviously. I think, echoing a theme that I think a number of members have said, and I certainly touched on. One of the concerns, though, is, with that increased budget, but with that increased focus on exploration, we do have a worry that more of the budget for space technology is going to focus on the exploration mission as opposed to kind of the cross-sectional multi-mission piece. And again, it's that borrowing from Peter to pay to Paul. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, I think that's a concern of mine as well, and we worry about that in the agency all the time. In terms, there's several things, right? There's the concern of will the technology get eaten by the operational side of the house, right? And I think that's the biggest concern we had for a while. What we've done, though, is we put some things in place that allow us to monitor that and make sure we're not doing that. I have a strategic integration activity between the mission directors today that allows, they have to come to me to say when they're doing that, so we don't internally rob from Peter to pay Paul. And I'm pretty comfortable with that process and feel like that alignment will stay in place. Not only that, when you see the details behind the engineering or the exploration, research, and technology line, there's still some cross-cutting budget in there. There's just the majority of it's going to be focused to exploration. There's some early stage activities still there, a small amount, but it's still in there to make sure we're keeping that seed corn, not just all exploration focused, but most of it is.
And, as my colleague from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, pointed out, I think most of the members on this committee in a bipartisan way are very supportive of the multi-mission aspect of NASA. And as it's our constitutional duty to set budget numbers and so forth, we do want to work with NASA and work with your administrators to make sure we're robustly supporting that multi-mission focus. I do have one last question. You'd agree that the decadal survey has served us fairly well in terms of prioritization and so forth?
Oh yeah, I think it's a stalwart for what we do from an agency standpoint.
Right.
But we don't always do exactly what the decadal says. It's just a good advising.
And it's a somewhat objective, non-political
Yep.
way of advising and prioritizing projects. Well, I'll just go on the record. I think you touched on, not doing the W-first mission from an astrophysics perspective is probably going to be perceived as leaving a hole in that continued science. I think we ought to work together to try to figure out how we continue to fill that hole or continue to move forward with the W-first project.
Okay.
And I'll yield back.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I had just a few more questions too, if you don't mind. Concerning Orion, last year NASA requested $1.186 billion for Orion, and Congress appropriated $1.35 in fiscal year 17, which continues under the current continuing resolution. The additional funding was necessary to carry out important work on EM1 rather than deferring it to EM2. NASA is once again requesting to decrease Orion funding. What content would be removed if NASA received $1.16 billion rather than the $1.35 in FY19?
Can I submit that for the record?
You sure can.
Yeah, let me get that back to you so I get the exact content that's in there.
We'd like to know.
Yeah.
Okay. And then concerning risk, in your January talk to CSIS, you spoke about risk, and that trading between specific engineering choices and national strategic imperatives is a difficult but occasionally necessary discussion. Is this the right time now for the nation to reassess how we handle risk? Is this something that NASA should engage with industry, trade associations, and academia on?
I think this is a good time as any to do that. I think we should do that all the time. Nothing we're going to take on in this exploration agenda is going to be without risk.
Right.
But we're not going to do it in a way, we're not going to take excessive risk either. We're going to make sure we manage that risk appropriately. And I think the American public, this body, all need to understand that's what that risk is. And risk comes in many fashions, as you know, Mr. Chairman. There's technical risk for a given mission. There's political risk for not doing it or doing it. There's programmatic risk in terms of the budget and the challenges we're trying to meet. And at the end of the day, I could make an argument that the least risky thing is to sit on the ground and not fly.
Right.
But I could tell you that's probably the most risky thing for us to do as a nation from an overall perspective.
I would agree.
And so that's, to me, so I think the time to have that discussion is probably now as we enter this next phase of exploration and pushing. And then would love to engage not only the groups you talked about, but frankly, this body as well, because you guys are the ones that help us authorize what we're going to go do and understand that.
Okay. And then on hurricane relief, we just got hit really hard by Hurricane Harvey at Johnson Space Center. My all 9 counties that I represent were federal declarations of disaster. What is the status of hurricane funding for NASA centers?
Yeah, we're working the apportionments with OMB now.
Yeah.
At a level of detail that we haven't done before, so we're trying to make sure we get that done correctly, and so that we're all tracking where that dollars go and make sure we know where it is. So we're working that, and we should get that out hopefully soon.
Okay. And then to kind of go back to a subject that's already been broached this morning on the mobile launch platform, you had spoken to it already, but I was wondering about I was down in Florida a couple of weeks ago for the National Space Council meeting, and you were there, and appreciated your testimony. The center director was telling us about some of the things that he thought about the mobile launch platform, and it sure sounded like it was would be a great thing if we could get this thing, get a second one. And as far as the time element and the construction of it, and since, if I understood you correctly earlier today, you said that's really kind of off the table right now, correct? Mm-hmm. If we decided to put it on the table, would we be behind the 8 ball in as far as the time elements in EM1 and EM2 launches?
I think the challenge would be if a mobile launcher showed up as something we're going to go build, we would not start modifying the one that's we're building for EM1, we would not start that modification process. And therefore, once we flew once on that launch platform, it's now ready to fly again. And so we would go through the process of hopefully purchasing another ICPS, right?
Right.
Again, with the expense that comes with it, I want to be really clear.
Yeah.
And also human rating that, and so we could fly Orion with crew quicker. And so maybe the first launch off of the new MLP that we would build in that mode might be EM3 or EM4, right? But it would leave us the capability to keep flying on the mobile launcher that we're building today instead of going in and modifying it.
Well, modifications on the existing mobile launch platform, are they, does that lead to any kind of an increased risk to be changing and remodifying and remodeling, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's, we believe there is risk with that. I mean, we've got a 33-month time period right now between the EM1 and EM2, mainly to do those modifications, because basically you have to add just a length to it to
Right.
be able to handle the new, the Block 1B SLS configuration. So that, anytime you do that, you're going to have some risk when you go in there. And that's a pretty complex piece of hardware. When you walk up and down the mobile launcher, you see how complex it is. So to add that
Right.
is some risk. So I think there's risk there. There's also risk in the amount of dollars we need to go do an MLP and an ICPS. And that's got to be, I'll say that's above my pay grade to make that decision. But from an administration perspective, we just decided that we'd rather not, those dollars weren't really available for us to go do that.
But ideally, it would be best to have a second one.
You could
Built from scratch.
You could see that from it depends on what your definition of ideal is, but yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, Mr. Lightfoot, this concludes my line of questioning, unless anybody, I don't think there's anyone else here. But I want to just commend you, compliment you on an excellent job that you've done stepping into the gap as our interim administrator. And would also like to echo some of the comments of my colleagues today that we're certainly hoping that the one that the President, Mr. Bridenstine, that the President has chosen to be the next administrator. We hope that happens soon. But listen, that doesn't take anything away from what the great jobs you've done, and just want to thank you, and thank you for being here this morning as well.
All right, thank you all. Thanks, committee.
Okay. All right, I want to thank the witness and his valuable testimony, the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. So with that, this hearing is adjourned.